to everyone. Happy Wednesday. My name is Bruce Amoroto, and I'm part of the Debt Justice Program at the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. Thank you so much for joining us at this third and last session of the APMDD Debt Justice webinar series. To make our webinar run smoothly, we have some house rules that my colleagues will post on the Zoom chat box. So through this three-part webinar series, we aim to contribute in raising awareness among APMDD members on the debt issue within countries and across the region. We also aim to build consensus and strengthen shared perspectives, analysis, and critique. And finally, we also aim to help develop advocacy and campaigning strategies in various fronts from the national to the global. So in session one, Debt Justice, a South Perspective, we unpacked the question of debt crisis and debt distress by asking whose crisis? By looking at the debt and the debt problem from the perspective of the Global South, we argued that the debt is a form of domination, and this so-called debt crisis is a crisis for lenders who fear they can't collect from borrowing countries. But it's important to stress that it's a catastrophe for the Global South as people are trapped in the multiple crises of health, livelihoods, and climate change, while public funds are locked in debt service payments. And at last week's session 2, from continuing past the debt problem in Asia, we delved deeper into the process of debt accumulation in the Global South, and we also highlighted how failed debt relief schemes of the past are being rehashed in the present. So at session 2, we showed that the debt in terms of human rights violations, but also in terms of complicit states and governments as economic and financial policies are shaped and continues to be shaped along neoliberal lines. So you can check out the videos as well as the highlights of sessions 1 and 2 over at the APMDD website, as well as the APMDD YouTube channel. My colleagues will post in the links on the chat box. So today at session 3 of the APMDD Debt Justice webinar series, we will have two main segments. First, we will look at the regional and global challenges, the directions and strategies for campaigning on debt justice in and from Asia. And then we will also look at the key moments for campaigning in the region and globally. We will have an open forum for each of the session presentations. Before we have the first presentation, we will show the video entitled G7 Heed the Call for Debt Cancellation, No to Fault Solutions. As the G7 held their annual meeting in the UK last June 2021, APMDD held debt actions in the Philippines, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh to raise anew the global call for debt cancellation. The meeting of G20 finance ministers from July 9 to 10 only reiterated the G7 positions of promoting limited, temporary, and meager debt relief solutions and peddling more debts, while remaining silent on dire conditions in middle-income countries excluded from these schemes. With peoples of the South facing deeper debt burdens in the coming years without adequate public health support and facing ever-intensifying climate change, debt cancellation grows even more urgent. It is a vital step for people's survival from COVID-19 and the multiple crises. We say we reject false solutions. We demand debt cancellation now. Are you ready with the video, G? Thank you.
Hanggang sa ngayon, nag-chair ng G7, mag-iipon ng 7 mayayamang bansa upang talakayin ang iba't ibang usapin na umaapekto sa buhay ng mamayan sa buong mundo. Pinag-uusapan na kanselahin ang utang na kuno dapat bayaran ng mga bansang tulad ng Pilipinas. Utang i-basura! Utang i-basura!
Thank you, G. So now, here to give us a look at the regional and global challenges, as well as the directions and strategies for campaigning on debt justice in and from Asia, is the coordinator of Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development, but she's also the co-coordinator of the global campaign to demand climate justice. She's also a member of the Global Coordinating Committee of the Global Alliance on Tax Justice, and a co-founder of the Fight Inequality Alliance, Lidi Nakpil. Lidi, you have 30 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, friends and colleagues. First of all, I think Bruce needs to update the introduction. I'm no longer in the coordinating committee of the Global Alliance on Tax Justice because our other APMDD colleagues have replaced me to represent us there, actually to represent TAFJA. And welcome to all of you. I'm very happy that we have a good, strong participation in this, I think, third and final installment of our debt justice series. We are going to have another round, I think, of these debt justice webinars so that we can expand our discussion on this event. So watch out for future announcements of our discussions. As usual, I'm going to begin my talk with an apology that my slides is not very creative due to lack of time to prepare these slides, but I hope that they will be useful in imparting the ideas that we have in terms of challenges, our key tasks, and our strategies for waging our struggles for debt justice. So I'm just going to do a screen share of the slides, which I cannot find at, oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah. So this is going to be kind of like an overview introduction to the main presentation, which will be handled by our colleague May, just to give us an overview of these challenges, our key tasks, and our strategies. So to reiterate our current context and challenges that we have actually delved into a little bit more in detail in the past two webinars. First of all, we see and recognize that the urgency, potential, and opportunities for debt cancellation and addressing unsustainable and illegitimate debt has really increased tremendously in the current context of the multiple crises and the foreseeable future. Debt is very much in the international agenda, and we welcome the fact that this is accompanied by renewed initiatives and actual support for debt work and debt campaigning. However, on the downside, we see that the responses of lenders are, of course, not surprising, coming from a very narrow framework of debt sustainability, not even addressing the issue of illegitimate debt, and of course, driven by their own interests to maintain the international financial architecture and the market and profit logic of finance capital. So we see these responses, these initiatives, the discourses that are driven by the G20, the G7, the IMF and the World Bank, and in our region, the Asian Development Bank, individual governments, private lenders. And I just add that even our governments in the South, in Asia, They are driven by the same logic. And in fact, even if debt cancellation and debt relief is on the table, very few Southern governments, including almost none from Asia, are actually acknowledging that they have debt problems and are not responding to even the very little debt relief being presented or being offered, because they are afraid that this might hamper their ability to borrow. So they're more interested in being able to continue to borrow rather than admitting that there is a problem of the debt and that there has to be initiatives for debt cancellation. There have been many civil society groups or several civil society groups and networks who have sustained work on debt through this last many years. But there is recognition of the need to massively broaden and scale up efforts to generate a new Jubilee moment, so to speak. So for those of you who have been working on debt for a long time, what we mean by a new Jubilee moment is that period in our history in the late 90s to the early 2000s when debt was very much in the agenda of many movements, both the South and in the North. And there were a lot of campaigning activities being done around the question of the debt. There has been a decline in these efforts following that period. So only a limited number of civil society groups carried on that work or sustained on that work. But we are now in a period where there is massive interest to rescale up that efforts and to broaden these efforts. So we, especially those of us in Asia, we are challenged to renew and regain momentum in our struggles for debt justice, not only to expand, strengthen, and mobilize our Asian movements and campaigns on debt, but also to lend our leadership in invigorating the global debt movement with strong Southern leadership and participation. So our urgent tasks, if we might summarize what we really need to do, what is our urgent task that we need to do today, we begin with the task of building, reinvigorating, and strengthening our national debt movements and the Asian debt movement. We will not get very far if debt is just a discourse or it's just an issue where we have activities from time to time. We need strong, robust national movements and regional movements in Asia as part of the broader Southern movement. We need to reshape and strengthen the global debt movement towards more robust, broad, and well-coordinated engagements and actions with strong leadership and participation of Southern campaigns and a stronger articulation of Southern debt perspectives and agenda. And at this point here, I'd like to really stress that it's different when it's from the point of view of Southern people and Southern movements, because we have, as those who are extremely affected by the debt problem, we have particular perspectives on the analysis as well as the solutions of debt that is based on justice from our perspective. And then we need to fight for gains and specific victories in the immediate period. So this is not just about waging a struggle that articulates very broad strategic calls for system change and for debt justice, but we really need to fight for gains and specific victories in the immediate period, because these are immediate needs of our people we are addressing. But at the same time, we need to lay the grounds for gains and victories in the medium and long term, because we do know that big changes in the international financial system, in the economies of our countries, and in the global economy will not be won just in a short term. So fighting for immediate gains towards wider and deeper unconditional cancellation of sovereign debt is one of the things that we need to do as part of our urgent task, and this involved bigger amounts for a wider number of countries and from a broader group of lenders. This is a very direct response to what is currently happening. No? So the debt relief on the table is only for very small amounts, for a limited, very small number of countries, and only from a very small group of lenders. So multilateral debt, for instance, is not being discussed as part of debt relief initiatives. There's only a limited number of countries that are talking about debt cancellation or even debt suspension for their bilateral loans, and private lenders are actually not participating. So we want to have wider, bigger amounts from a broader group of lenders that we need to fight for in the immediate period. Second, we also need to challenge and counter the dominant framework and discourse on debt sustainability, because without challenging and critiquing and debunking this dominant discourse, we cannot win this fight for broader, bigger debt relief and debt cancellation. And we need to reassert the problem of illegitimate debt, because debt sustainability is only addressing one part of the problem. The problem of illegitimate debt is a broader discourse that we must need to reassert. We need to challenge and prevent and discourage lending as the main fiscal response to the multiple crises, because this is another thing that is happening. We've already noted the fact that in the face of this multiple crisis, the global health pandemic, the economic crisis, the climate crisis, what we see is an offering of more loans. So this multiple crisis will actually leave developing countries or countries of the South with even bigger debts. And in addition, we need to challenge, because that's part of the fiscal responses in the multiple crisis, the use of public funds for bailouts of corporations, in particular for fossil fuel corporations and lending for fossil fuel projects. We also need to demand our governments in the South, in Asia, to take decisive action to pursue debt cancellation and other solutions to unsustainable and illegitimate debt. So we have many countries in Asia that's not even talking about the debt issue or the debt problem in their countries or with their citizens. We need to fight for national and international mechanisms and processes for addressing unsustainable and illegitimate debt. So it should not be just talking or discussing the situation of the debt. There has to be mechanisms and processes put in place to address the problem of the debt. So for instance, country debt audits, we must revive the call for the country debt audits, and also the call for an international mechanism led by the UN to address sovereign debt crisis. We also need to assert our critique and fight for changes in the current lending, borrowing, and repayment policy. So debt cancellation, yes, but not just that, because debt cancellation is only addressing current outstanding debts. We need to change lending, borrowing, and repayment policies, practices, transactions, and arrangements to prevent the accumulation or the recurrence of unsustainable and illegitimate debts. We also need, of course, we know this very well, even if there's debt cancellation, it doesn't guarantee that the funds freed from debt service will be properly used by our governments. So we need to ensure that the funds freed from debt service are used to address people's needs and well-being in the face of the multiple crises. And all of the above should be part of our broader struggles to transform financial economic systems so that they are more democratic, just, equitable, gender fair and responsive, sustainable, and post-carbon as part of our fight against climate change. So just sharing with you our theory of change and strategies that we are following. First, we know and we firmly believe that the leadership and role of Southern movements of Southern people's movements is central and critical. We must drive the struggles with our perspectives and the strength of our collective actions. That is why the first urgent task is to build strong and robust Southern movements working in key countries, engaging and targeting national governments, and working together to engage and target international institutions, arenas, and processes. But we do know that we cannot win the fight only by ourselves. So we locate our role and contributions within a theory of change. That's now one of the terminologies that's being used, and a strategy or strategies that involve a broader set of actors, various types of interventions at different levels, national, regional, and global, and multiple targets and arenas. So we're not just addressing one target, many targets, and we fight in many different arenas. So just to summarize in a graphic, we begin with our Southern movements and networks, but we also have allies among international NGOs and Northern movements and networks. And together, we want to strengthen a global debt campaign or a global debt movement addressing Southern governments and Northern governments who are also part of intergovernmental processes, who are part of the governance of international financial institutions, who are part of forums like the G20, Northern governments, which serve as bilateral lenders, but there are also Southern governments who are lenders to other Southern governments, like China, for instance, or in Africa, South Africa has actually lent to other Southern African states. And of course, their development finance institutions. We have private lenders and the financial market players, and then, of course, the international credit ratings agencies. So this graphic here is trying to present, on the one hand, who are the many players: Southern movements, international NGOs, Northern movements and networks, comprising a global debt movement. We also have experts, analysts, and think tanks that we count among as our allies in the global debt movement. We also should identify allies among decision makers in the South and in the North, and together we fight for these changes. Of course, different actors have different unities and calls, but on a unity platform, we can fight our common battles and fight in these different arenas. Our strategies, of course, need to involve an effective combination of the following: to call attention to the issues, express our resistance and protest, expose the issues and promote our analysis and calls, and very importantly, generate pressure, because if we don't generate that pressure, we cannot compel our targets to act, and we cannot compel the changes that need to be asserted and need to be won. So we combine public awareness and generating public support, mobilization and actions, media and communication. So now we have the traditional media and social media platforms, which have become even more important in the time of COVID and quarantine protocols. Mobilization and actions, of course, are now not just physical actions, but we're also doing digital actions. We need to do work that challenges and reshapes the mainstream discourse, and to engage in policy engagements, to join policy engagements, to debunk their analysis, their framework, their policy positions. We need to build broad alliances and movements together with other groups based on unities. And we need to have heightened coordinated efforts during critical global, regional, and national moments to generate the responses or to compel the responses from target institutions and processes. So the other graphic is kind of like trying to present this. So we combine these different elements in our strategies with the right timing, with the effective combination, when we define our tactics as part of these broader strategies. So that's kind of like a general introduction to pave the way for the next presentation. Thank you so much. And Bruce, will there be a Q&A after this, or should we just wait for all of the presentations?
We can open the floor for questions. We have 15 minutes for questions, and then so for those of you who you can ask your question on the chat box, or you can also raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you for questions or comments. So don't be shy.
Perhaps it's better to move on to the next one, Bruce, because the two presentations come together.
Okay, we'll do that instead. So okay. So in Lily's presentation, we saw the current context of we saw that the current context of the multiple crises uh, makes for campaigning on debt justice more urgent. The global financial system and structures are arguing that for the global south to survive, borrowing and more debts are needed. But we from the global south, we say no to false solutions, cancel the debt now. So now we go to the next presentation. We have to present on the key moments ahead, the a map or a timeline of for campaigning in the region and globally. We have the Justice Program Manager, May Buenaventura. May, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So we now come to, after our two sessions, we're now come to that part that what do we do about the issues and the context that we learned about. So here are some of the key moments and the proposals for action. So I will just share my screen. Where is the? Okay, so this was taken from, the picture you see was taken from the debt action video that we shared earlier. That's right behind us is the British Embassy, where the G7 summit was held, no, in June. So some of the key moments for debt justice campaigning, and there's quite several of them, and this is we are rising to the call for action. So just to reiterate also some of the points that Lydie mentioned, that part of our goals is to contribute to winning gains and specific victories in the immediate period, no, in the international responses to the debt problem. So we've seen in past discussions that how limited and how temporary, how similar to failed responses in the past are being offered to us now in the face of the crisis, no, the pandemic and the attendant crisis of health, economic recession, and climate change. So we also seek to lay the grounds for gains and victories in the medium and long term. So these are involved processes for addressing unsustainable and illegitimate debt, actual policy and practice changes in debt cancellation, stopping the payments of these unsustainable and illegitimate debts, policies also in lending and borrowing, including for projects that are harmful to people, communities, the environment, and the climate. Third, Lydie mentioned on the need to provide leadership, no, as we build this Asian debt movements and reinvigorate it, and contributing to the global debt justice movements with very strong voices from the South. Fourth is waging and launching strong national debt campaigns and initiatives in Asian countries. Many of the policies that are being imposed by international financial institutions, for example, use the authority of national governments to be able to, so quote unquote, domesticate national laws. So, for example, Reza in last session very clearly captured that there are now IMFs and World Banks within countries in governments, and they're the ones that are also that are pushing no nationally for this the change in or and the implementation of policies along neoliberal lines. And fifth, mounting specific campaigns and strategies for addressing important major developments in the debt landscape. So some of the key tasks that was also enumerated earlier by Lydie. The first one is, of course, contributing to reshaping and strengthening the global debt movement. And as I said, the stronger articulation, stronger messaging, and voices of Southern debt perspectives and agenda. Second is rebuilding our Asian debt movement and catalyzing support for national debt campaigns and initiatives, asserting the critique of the narrow framework on debt sustainability, actively campaigning on clear processes for policy and systemic changes that pave the way for immediate, medium-term, and strategic changes. Fifth, reiterating and reasserting illegitimate debt. No? So we need to, um, this has somehow fallen off the table, but we know that there has been recognition from the UN also at one time by the World Bank that there is such a thing as illegitimate debt that should be immediately canceled, no? For the sheer injustice of compelling peoples to part with scarce public funds to pay for these illegitimate debts. And six, there are also developments that we need to study and look into. So in the last session, I shared about the China loans, and this is clearly a growing area of concern. For instance, in South Asia, the whole of South Asia has close to 50% of its loans owed to China, no? So this is one of those developments. Another is the increasingly bigger share of lending is through the financial market. So we also show that the exposure to private creditors, lenders, and specifically within that, the large and increasing exposure to bond holders. So this presents a problem also in asserting the cancellation of such debts when they're traded and exchanged, and unlike the official creditors, no? And then we also have that huge problem of public domestic debt that is also not being addressed. So it's not only the external debt, but also in many countries like the Philippines, and I think Indonesia also, there's a much bigger domestic debt than the external debt. So these are some of the issues and developments that we need to pay attention to. So again, a reiteration of what I shared last week, that globally, this is also contained in an open letter that was signed by more than or almost 600 organizations worldwide, demanding for one, the immediate cancellation of unsustainable and illegitimate debt. And there's a part there that says it should begin with a minimum of cancellation of debt payments for at least 4 years and without penalties, and for the funds freed from this cancellation to go into people's survival, no? And the attendant crisis in health, in the economic recession and climate change. Second, we do not want, Second, we oppose the use of loans no? Primarily the use of loans, more borrowings to address COVID-19 responses. So related to that, we also have demands in tax and fiscal justice, that there are funds that we can tap into and not necessarily borrow more. No? Third is the demand for UN United Nations process and mechanisms for comprehensively addressing unsustainable and illegitimate debt. And together with this, an audit, no? A comprehensive audit by both lenders and borrowers. And fourth is the adoption of international rules for fair, responsible, democratic lending and borrowing. So what are some of the opportunities that we see in the next few months, no? Or the last quarter of the year? One of these is coming up very soon, which is the 76th session of the UN General Assembly. No? As you know, the UNGA is the highest policymaking body of the UN. So this is a very opportune moment to raise our issues around debt. And all these are in the agenda of the UN. So they are, of course, all related. But there's a particular point there on external debt, sustainability, and development. So we bring into this discourse as well the domestic debt, no? Because it's clearly not here in what they plan to discuss. So that's the whole half of September, where there will be various events and also civil society events that speak to the current crisis and very clearly linked to the issues of debt justice. No? So, for example, within those days, we have the UN Food System Summit. So earlier during the pre-summit, we raised these issues about that the funds that can be unlocked from debt cancellation can help food producers worldwide, of whom many are women and are facing starvation themselves. So it's a really, this is a really ironic setup that those who plant and produce food are also starving, no? Are also suffering hunger. No? And then there's this will be followed by the high-level dialogue on energy. We also spoke to that issues by raising, you can see here the graphic below, addressing the World Bank or calling out the World Bank and its double speak, that it says that it puts climate into action, but it's also continuing its financing of fossil fuel projects. So we say no loans as climate finance. No? And then we have here the 15th conference, UN Conference on Trade and Development, the following month in October. The UNCTAD has always included in its agenda the issue of debt, no? And APMDD has, on several occasions, no, been an intervener in the UNCTAD conferences. No? So a key area, for example, that it identifies is limiting countries' exposure to financial volatility and debt. So debt is clearly in its agenda, no? And similar to just like, the processes of the UN, there are pre-events or ministerial meetings. And perhaps our friends from South Asia and also in Southeast Asia can take note of the meetings of the least developed countries as occasions for engagement with their own national officials. There's also a ministerial meeting of the Group of 77, which are composed of the developing countries and Chinese senior officials. And then finally, the World Leaders Dialogues or Summit from October 4 to 5. A major, theme coming out in relation to that is addressing unsustainable debt burdens in developing countries, from emergency responses to systemic reforms. So it's an opening for us to elaborate some more. What are those systemic reforms? What are those structural changes that need to happen for these debt burdens to be truly alleviated? No? The graphic here is points out the vaccine inequality and also how it links to the domination of corporations over trade, and the high level of uncertainty that countries face now because of this inequality in access to vaccines. Then we come to the second half of October, where that's quite familiar to us. So the G20 will be holding its summit at the end of October, but before that, there's a G20 finance ministers meeting. So both occasions are important for us to speak on the issue of debt and the debt relief mechanisms that the G20 has primarily authored, no? And these are the kind of debt relief schemes that ultimately plunge us deeper in debt, because they also sponsored these kinds of debt reliefs in the past, as Lydie shared in earlier sessions. And the countries that are also now in crisis are the ones that availed of those debt relief schemes. And then this has become almost traditional for debt justice movements, the annual meetings, which will be held from 15 to 17 October, followed by the Finance in Common Summit. So the Finance in Common Summit is the gathering of public development banks. And I think the one held earlier was the first in the history that public development banks were convened all together to discuss the role in the crisis. So onwards to November and December, we have, of course, the big conference of parties, the 26th conference of parties, or the climate change conference, happening from 31st October to 12 November. And we've raised, in connection with the climate debt, which we earlier talked about as a huge debt that has roots in our history of colonization. Climate debt also speaks to illegitimate debts or projects loan-funded projects that destroy the environment, dislocated communities, and violated a host of human rights. No? On the 13th of November, that is marked because that will be the first year of one of the debt relief schemes of the G20 and the Paris Club, which is the common framework for debt treatments and beyond. And we earlier critiqued this as really being flawed, in that it depends on the initiative of the borrowing countries, and also has several conditions that go with it that really render it as a false solution to the debt problem. I've also included the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is also traditional already for the UN, but we expanded to include the violation of economic rights of women. That is also a form of violence and leads to the violation. Without that economic empowerment and the lack of or heavily discriminatory economic policies, that should be raised during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So we very much want our debt justice struggles to have this strong dimension of addressing women's rights and gender equality. And of course, finally, Human Rights Day and the death justice issues are very much part of raising the ways that uh, it violates a host of human rights. So, this is so you saw earlier the theme of the UN, which is recover better, and we actually say it's not only recovery. We don't want to go back simply to what was before. We want to rebuild, to reboot, and transform. No? So in rising to the call for action, no, for death justice, we're looking at global days of action for debt cancellation around the 14th or the 14th to the 31st of October 2021, and this will cover what I earlier listed as events related to the UN General Assembly, the G20, the IMF World Bank meetings, and other related events. So instead of what we did before last year as the Global Week of Action, we want this to be Global Days of Action for Debt Cancellation. So it is hoped that in APMDD or APMDD can be, in the forefront of this effort of these Global Days of Action for Debt Cancellation. So this is my last slide, and I just want to flash this. Many of you may be familiar with Tomas Sankara. So October 15, there will be also activities to remember Thomas Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso, who was assassinated on October 15, I think in the 80s, no? And he has many really sharp things to say about debt, about the violation of women's rights, about corporations and capitalist domination. So this is very, very important. He has many things to say about these issues, and one of those is that he called debt as a cleverly managed reconquest of Africa, and that applies, I think, to countries of the South. That it aims at subjugating its growth and development through foreign rules, and thus each one of us becomes the financial slave, which is to say, a true slave. So thank you very much, and we really hope that we can support that proposal for the Global Days of Action from the 14th to the 31st of October. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, May. It looks like we're gonna have very busy last quarter of 2021. Oh, okay. We have a comment here from Galeshka. Galeshka, would you like to open your mic for your additional question and input, perhaps? Please go ahead and open
Okay.
your mic. Go ahead.
As I've mentioned in my comment in the chat, I think Lady on the other session mentioned that we are not poor country, we are overexploited country, and today we must also remember that the wealth that this developed country lend us today is coming from our own wealth that being robbed during their colonialization. I mean, in Indonesia, how many the Dutch wealth today is coming from Indonesia? They used to say that the ledger of the Netherlands ledger is depending on Indonesia export. and now they lend those wealth, those funds that they get by robbing us and lend us. And I think we need to talk about the the wealth that they rob in the context of this debt cancellation issue. That's it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think you're you're talking about reparations. Is that correct? For for resources that were transferred from the south to the
Yeah,
north.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Would there be any reply, reactions, perhaps from Lady or May? Or similar questions from our... Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead, Lady.
Yeah, actually, this is kind of a constant in our debt discourse about the net outflow of resources from the south to the north, which is precisely what Galesh is referring to. So we have raised this and we continue to raise this. Perhaps we should, because we did not do, we concentrated on the tasks and the campaigning in this debt session, but in the previous webinars, in webinar 1 and 2, we have raised this very fact as part of our analysis. No, it's true. That's why we try to avoid this term poor countries in our discourse. Impoverished is the better word, because we are not poor. We have been impoverished because of the net resource transfer from the south to the north. We are rich in natural resources, our labor, and so on, human resources, and so on. But the wealth that is created within our countries is being transferred from our countries to the north, no, through various means, not just in terms of interest payments on the debt, which is huge. It is also being transferred in terms of illicit financial flows. It is transferred because of unfair trade relations, where our resources and our products are being sold in the global market at very low rates. It's very much undervalued. Our labor, the wages have been kept low. So there are many forms of resource transfers, and we are saying there's a net resource transfer, because while the North has been saying that, yeah, we are providing you with investments and loans because your countries lack capital and so on, and our governments are repeating the same arguments. We have to borrow because we don't have enough money, or we need to attract foreign investors because we need that foreign capital to boost our economies, when in fact there's a lot more wealth being transferred to the north than the north putting in capital in our own economies. So that is a very important part of the discourse. And
Thank you
this
very
has been
much.
happening for many decades, since the time of colonialism, which is what also Galesh is pointing out. So yeah, it's a very strong part of our discourse. We discussed that also, especially in the first round of the debt webinars, when we say the debt is part of our colonial legacy, the legacy of colonialism, and part of the neo-colonial relations that continues today.
Thank you, Lady. Are there other questions? Don't be shy.
I think, Bruce, perhaps what we can do in the succeeding discussions, maybe people are not so prepared today, is we need to really exchange ideas. How do we revive, strengthen, in some cases revive, in some cases strengthen, in some cases build debt campaigns in our countries, no? Because these are not just things we need to analyze and discuss. These are things we need to, the debt issue is an issue we need to campaign and develop struggles around. So we need to maybe exchange views how we can work together to build, to strengthen, to revitalize debt campaigning in different countries.
I agree. I think it's also a very important, perhaps, strategy to how do we locate the debt justice struggle at the very local level. So we have participants here from uh, different parts of the Philippines, for example, and how at the community level, how can the community own the campaign and the struggle for debt justice?
Yeah, I think before we discuss how the communities can own that, I think how do the organizations present in this discussion, how do we start catalyze or building up these initiatives? And that includes, of course, involving our communities. But the first onus of responsibility is on our organizations. Maybe we can hear from participating groups in this discussion, ideas about how can we help each other? What do you think? What do you need? What kind of help can we extend to each other in order to start building our debt campaigns?
Maybe I can put the organizations on the spot. Participants who are on the call, just to throw in ideas from your organization on how to be to be engaged in the debt justice campaign.
Yeah. So Bruce, I don't want to put Reza and our other colleagues in Indonesia on the spot, but maybe one important question would be, do you think it would be timely or even the right approach if we work together to revive not Kruha Cow? For instance, would there be interest in Indonesia? A question, for instance, for our colleagues in Pakistan, would there be some interest in building maybe a coalition around debt in Pakistan that will involve different organizations? In the Philippines, we have FDC, the Freedom from Debt Coalition, that continues its work. But I think we also need to brainstorm how we can help re-strengthen FDC. So some of the questions that maybe we can start discussing. Reza, what do you think? Would there be some appetite in Indonesia to maybe build cow again? Or maybe a different approach now? Or what do you think?
I don't know if my microphone is good enough. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, I think I told my about this. We've been we're communicating this with Aksi, Soldiers Perempuan also Walhi Jakarta. So we have a series of discussion at least weekly now.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a part because we also felt the need to revive the movement against anti-debt movement here. So yes,
yeah,
of course. Yeah.
I think you also had a recent webinar, right, around the debt issue.
Yeah, and there's two like FGD already. I think 2 weeks from now. Yeah, let's hope that we can build up something from that.
That's great to hear, and of course we're We are ready to help in whatever way we can. Maybe thoughts from our colleagues in Pakistan or Bangladesh. I'm quickly scanning who are here. Asanul, there was a death campaign before in Bangladesh. Is there a possibility to bring back different organizations together again to do that?
Yes, Lady, and thank you very much for your nice presentation also to my. Yes, we are also planning to do a network with our local NGOs and like-minded civil organizations on the debt issues, since this is very important now, because debt is gradually increasing in Bangladesh, and per capita debt is increasing drastically. And then now the challenge is that almost 60 to 65% of the revenue is going to spend for this mitigating this debt liability. The challenges is that that Bangladesh as Bangladesh is graduating from LDCs in 2024, the country will need to comply with the WTO mandated TRIPS agreement. As LDC, so Bangladesh is enjoying exemptions from the patent rights and conditions that set by the TRIPS. But after graduation from LDC, Bangladesh will not no longer enjoy this exemption from implementing the agreement. So we think that it will supposed to affect adversely the entire health management and also the health industry, especially the pharmaceuticals. So and these debts mostly implementing especially for the mega building projects, not for the education, health, and other public services. So we have a lot of things to do. So very shortly we'll come to you and what kinds of cooperation and technical support we can get from you. We the QTBD always grateful to APMDD since 2020. We are getting all sorts of support and cooperation and technical support and cooperation, other advice and for getting for promoting tax justice, also the debt justice in Bangladesh. So we are also seeking your continuous cooperation in here, and very shortly we'll come to you after discussion with my other friends in Bangladesh, and so our executive director. Thank you, Lady.
Thank you, Asanul. Simon, would you like to share something about the possibilities in Pakistan? Yeah, so maybe Bruce, we can do some country by country consultations in the next round. Something we can discuss so we can help in the planning for revival of that campaigning.
Yeah, I think there's also some developments that are really, on the ground that we need to be. You may get limited information from mainstream media about what's really happening in country. So that would be very useful to all of us, no? So that our actions can be relevant to the people's concerned and also effective, no? Yeah. So perhaps if there are no other comments, Bruce, we have all these suggestions about exchanging information, reaching out bilaterally also to countries and holding consultations online, of course, as we're still in the pandemic. And then also keeping each other up to date about the actions of allied networks and organizations as we go into September and the months ahead, when many international events will have a significant implications for policy wise on the debt, no, and the debt burdens that are being claimed from the South. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, May. Yes, I totally agree. I think the next series of sessions would be should be focused on like national level consultations. Uh, in if there are no more questions or
Bruce,
additional
can I say?
comments, sure, go ahead, please.
One thing I like to add, this is a continuous process and that we have to continue because the campaign advocacy, we must continue until unless the change comes, because until the strong political will come here for changing the system, it is not possible to change the whole system. That we see that we are advocating, we are doing campaign in Bangladesh with the government officials and engaging them. But very little change we are seeing there because of the less accountability and the transparency of the spending the money in respect of expenditure justice. The debt, you see that what I had said earlier, it is almost 170% has been increased in last 10% per capita debt. But this debt money is going to different mega structure projects for bridge construction and mega building projects, not for the public service. Still, this is so. For example, in our health, this is less than 5%. Is still the total GDP. So our next challenge is to convince the government to do give emphasis on the public services so that this to also to stop the illicit financial flows. Yearly, this is $171 billion per year average that is shift to capital flight in the tax haven countries. So these are the very big challenges. So we have, I think, we have lot to do things here to ensure the governance and also the information, the agreement that is government doing. It should be public to minimize the debt. So these are the things. So thank you very much for giving the chance.
Thank you, Asanul. I see the hand of Manjet raised. Go ahead, Manjet.
Yes, thank you. I think you're right, Asanul. Connected to the public services or the lack of it issue. Because, for example, here in the Philippines, the government has already incurred almost 3 trillion in debt since the pandemic started, and we're our record, or the comparative record, shows that this administration, this government, the incumbent, has surpassed the levels of borrowing, and most of it even before the pandemic, but most of it during the pandemic. And by end of this year, the current 11.7 trillion, is it, mga taga FDC, is going to jump to 13.7 trillion in debt. That is the projection. In other words, there are more debts coming. There are more loans to be incurred. Now here in the Philippines, it's the burning issue is and it's such a big scandal and controversy that after all that has been borrowed and money moved out or realigned, supposedly for COVID response and recovery. Much of it, when we have a commission on audit here, no, that is quasi government. In other words, it's independent from the executive, which has recently come out with a report of deficiencies, if not and anomalies in the spending. Now, much of the debt that I was just referred to incurred during pandemic was done as part of COVID response, and you now have, it's such a burning issue now that the current situation of the people is so dire, really dire, in terms of there's what with the new surge caused by the Delta variant, and then the lockdowns and the additional job losses, where government is unable to provide or to deliver on social amelioration packages that are expected, because they asked everybody to drop everything and lock down. So and there are real struggles for the demand for like even our frontline health workers are threatening not just protest actions but mass resignations because of undelivered special risk or hazard base for them. And workers are also in protest actions demanding for, we call this ayuda, but it's social amelioration assistance in light of all the lockdowns and job losses, and including other demands, employment, emergency employment plan, and etc. When the reports came out from the Commission on Audit, these protests have been heightened, and now even the middle class is in an uproar over what the hell happened to all the funds. And I think by connecting all these borrowings that working, where did all the borrowings go, and the consequence of it, this kind of linking might help facilitate as a springboard for pushing on the debt campaign. If we can dovetail a campaign on it, right now it's focused on the lack of government action and support for in light of the pandemic and economic losses because of the pandemic. And of course, one puts to question government's plan and framework, and there is an ongoing debate on framework of development being used for recovery. We can dovetail the issue of debt in relation to these new borrowings that we incurred the past 2 years, almost 2 years now. And this can be a jumping board for, but first, a low-key level, because something else is up front: life and death, hunger and life and death and hunger and joblessness. But that is a way of entry into so that we can take off on a debt campaign maybe in time for before the end of the year. And I'm just thinking, that's why I said I think you're right, Asanul. Maybe we can look at that also, because I don't know about your governments, but our government here is in deficit spending. Really, where our parliament is going to draw up a new budget, a new budget for 2022, and what the executive has has presented is again banking on deficit spending and banking on borrowing, which is why I say they intend to borrow 3 trillion for the 2022 by end 2022. So I think that's possible if we link it, and because here in the past we were able to join the debt cancellation campaign that the APMDD and the international effort of APMDD through, well, mainly statements and propaganda, but and then campaigns in social media, no, echoing it, but to be able to transform it into more than just a propaganda campaign, into actually shaping it into a fight, maybe next year. Oh, I will just add that here in the Philippines, election 2022 is an election year. The election period starts and everybody starts registering who's running. So by October, we can make debt an election agenda. But then again, it becomes a burning issue if we link it to the lack thereof, the deficiencies, anomalies, the illegitimacy of this debt, because it is given to corruption, graft and corruption of this government, and it has not gone to the urgent needs of the people. We can that can happen. It becomes an election issue. So those are ideas that maybe we can take up now. That mean, but I'm saying this. That's going beyond what we did last year, through social media and actions. Because like I'm sure, like your governments and ours, our government stand, and the response to our corporate debt cancellation, our Department of Finance has responded. That's the last thing we're going to do, because that's going to undercut our chances of being our credit ratings if we demand debt cancellation. So there is discourse on that, but we can heighten it through what I just suggested. Thank you. Just ideas I'm throwing for all of us to consider how to transform the current into just a campaign that's coming from outside, but bring it into our own backyard or front yard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjet. Yes, indeed, I think May presented on that as well. That the overall campaign should be linked to system change. Asanul, do you have
Yeah,
additional?
thank you. Just a little short issues. Thank you, Benjeti, for drawing the issues. So thank you very much. Yes, we also have this year government also in Bangladesh passed about 71 billion dollar of budget, where the only 24 billion is the deficit, and that's why government is heavily depending on the loan, especially from the domestic and external. And when that comes, there is a condition. The main problem is the condition. In last week, May rightly said that in 2012 that IMF has given the condition the government against a loan of $970 million under the EFC. EFC means the external credit facilities. So what is the condition? The condition was that the amount is very little, about 1 billion, is nothing. But the condition is that that VAT Act has to be passed. That is uniform VAT rate. That is 15% for in all aspects. At present, we have different rates in different of VAT rate in different components. especially the commodity item. So government has given the commitment that gradually they will implement the conditions of the IMF. And now, what is the situation? The situation is this: almost 90 to 95% areas is covered by this new VAT Act that is prescribed by the IMF. So the situation is going down by following the prescription of different international lenders. Considering the overall economy, this debt is very little. But if we somehow stop the underground economies, black economies, illicit financial flows, multinational tax evasion, that is, and if we expand the tax net for the rich and people and other rich businessmen, then it is possible to earn huge revenue from there, not need to depend any debt. So this is the very big challenge for us. But the challenge is that government is not giving eyes on it in these areas, because VAT is a very easy tools of revenue mobilization rather than arresting tax evasion and to tackling tax by the MNCs and the rich. Thank you, Manjit and others for sharing and brought out the issues here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asanul.
Bruce?
Go ahead, May.
Yeah, okay. So just connecting also to what Manjet earlier shared. So there's been studies in the health sector also that the loans incurred supposedly for COVID responses are not really materializing in terms of increased access, no? So this was shared by Feminapat of Women Health from the health sector. And also, in addition to you, for Bangladesh, it's very clear that you know this for sure, Asanul, that the increase in VAT rates has also come as in connection with the loan conditionalities of the IMF. So also in the interest that they will, in their interest to get the payments, they impose the regressive tax of value-added tax, even though they recognize that this has regressive effects, meaning it is even harder to bear for the ordinary working people who must part with a larger share of their smaller incomes in order to pay for to make the VAT payments on top of various goods and services. So yeah, so I'll just end there now.
Thank you, May. I'm checking the chat as well as and I don't see any hands raised. Perhaps at this point, before we close, may we hear again from Lady and May for some closing remarks.
Well, I just want to thank everyone again and looking forward to more discussions, probably on a country by country basis, so we can get to the business of having more concrete discussions on how we can help each other in scaling up our work and meeting the campaign plans for the next coming weeks. Thank you.
May.
Okay, so maraming salamat, as we say here in the Philippines. Thank you very much for your supporting the Death Justice webinar series. And from the comments, we know that we need more. We need more of these events to really go into the nitty-gritty of the issues. And there's even other ways that we sink deeper in debt that are not so obvious, no? Like the contingent liabilities of privatized projects. So that's also a way that debt increases that's not very visible. And there's also this really trend towards public-private partnerships, no? That you would think that it's a partnership and you're on equal footing, but it's not, no? And it's also a way that corporations pass on the debt. They come in with no equity, and then they borrow, and then eventually that gets assumed as public debt, and public debt means the people pay. So thank you very much, and we hope that we will continue to exchange information. Like, for example, the information that Asanul shared is very important of how much the proportion or the share of revenue goes to debt service, and that also opens up or firmly establishes concretely establishes the links with tax and fiscal justice, no, with the issue of debt justice. So I hope we all look forward, or we monitor the resource materials that we will be able to generate from the three-part webinar series. We've already uploaded the summaries of session 1 and 2, and session 3 will be upcoming soon in the next few days. And then also from there, building on looking more closely at the national debt landscape, and thinking about actions around those contexts. So thank you very much.
Thank you, May. So on behalf of the Debt Justice Program at APMDD, thank you so much for attending our Debt Justice webinar series. We look forward to having you in our next series of webinars. We will post the highlights of this session, as well as uh, the video on the APMDD website. You can also check us out at on YouTube. Again, thank you and have a great day.